Hi everyone, Matthew DeSantis here with NYRA Bets, here with another Breeders' Cup Classic Contender Spotlight video, and this one is on everybody's favorite dirt marathoner, and that is Next. Can he do what we've all been wanting to see him do, which is cut back a little bit in distance and go against the best horses in the world going at 1.25 miles? Now, before we get into this very special Spotlight video, I want to remind you to press that like button and subscribe to the NYRA Bets YouTube channel today. Subscribing is completely free of cost, just notifies you when new videos are dropping on the channel. We have these sort of contender spotlight videos. We also have a lot of trainer by trainer analysis videos that are up here going through their top contenders. I have a video up going through the post-draw reactions, some initial thoughts on winners, losers, morning line decisions to be made in terms of where you might be able to find value. Later in the week, we're going to have long shot video with myself and Kaylee Shapiro. I'm also going to do a capping the card for Juvenile Friday and another one for Classic Saturday. You definitely don't want to miss out. This is your one-stop shop for everything Breeders' Cup. Now, also want to remind you, play on the NYRA Bets app. Download today. If you use the promo code CUP25, you get a $200 matched bonus and a free $25 bet. So best way to play the Breeders' Cup is right here on NYRA Bets. All right, folks. Well, listen, let's talk about Next. What an exciting day it was when I found out he was actually going to go to the Breeders' Cup. And for those of you who may just watch the Kentucky Derby and the Triple Crown, and maybe you watch a couple races at Saratoga and you tune in for the Breeders' Cup, maybe Next is not a horse that's on your radar. Maybe you don't know much about this horse. He is a really exciting horse for those of us who follow racing all the time because he has been the dominant dirt marathon horse for the last 2 years. But he only runs at 1.5 miles or at least 1 3/8 miles. Sometimes he runs even longer than that, but at least 1 3/8 miles to 1.5 miles is kind of where he normally is. And when I say dominant, he has not lost in virtually 2 years. He's won his last 7 races, and he has won them by massive margins. I believe his shortest victory was by about 3.5 lengths, but by and large, he's winning by double-digit lengths every single time out without ever even being asked. He has an incredibly high cruising speed. He is a horse that has just become so dominant in this division, and to the point where there really are not any other races for him to run in. There used to be a Breeders' Cup undercard race, a Thoroughbred Aftercare Alliance race. That has no longer appears on the Breeders' Cup undercard. As a result, the connections really don't have anywhere else to point him in terms of other races to go 1.5 miles. So as a result, they made the decision, we're going to come to the Breeders' Cup. There was some discussion, do we go to the turf? Do we go to the Classic? The turf being 1.5 miles would be a better distance. Cutting back to 1.25 miles, obviously you're contending with faster paces than what he is accustomed to dealing with in these longer marathon races. But like I said, he is a dominant horse, and let's dive into Next, talk a little bit more about him. What a cool horse. Trainer Dan Cowan, jockey Luan Machado, sired by Not This Time, and he has been, like I said, just a dominant horse going that 1 3/8 miles, 1.5 miles, 1 5/8 distance over the last 2 to 2.5 years, and has won the Brooklyn Grade 2 twice, 2 years in a row, has won the Greenwood Cup twice, both, the last 2 years, has won that Thoroughbred Aftercare, which used to be on the undercard of the Breeders' Cup Saturday, also has won the Birdstone Stakes twice. Again, there is no close competition for him in this division that he has been running in. So there really was nothing else to do. Now, to be fair to the owners and the connections, if I had a horse that could just keep collecting checks and winning checks, I'd probably keep running him at that distance. I get it. As a fan, it's going to be a lot of fun to see whether or not he can take his running style, which is more of a tracking running style, to the Breeders' Cup, going 1.25 miles. These fractions are going to be faster than anything he's seen recently. And I think that's a real thing to keep in mind, that he is a horse that likes to track the pace. He usually sits second in his early races, early in the race, but he's a horse that gets away with, like I said, slightly slower fractions because these horses are running longer. So therefore, they're not going 23 and change to the quarter or 46 and change to the half. They're going more modest, 24:48, 25:50. Sometimes you're going to see different pace scenarios depending on sometimes the distance or just the dynamics of the race. but he's able to sit right up on the pace at a slower pace. What's going to happen when he might be a little further back? Now, I think what's particularly interesting about Next is the fact that he is much like Torpedo Anna in this regard. A point that I made about Torpedo Anna going into the Travers was that we had not really ever seen Brian Hernandez Jr. ask her for everything that she had. She had been winning so easily against her fellow 3-year-olds, fillies, that Hernandez usually might have gone to the crop once in the stretch, but really rarely ever went back to her in terms of using the crop. Next is an even more dramatic example of that. When he is winning by 10, 15, 20, 25 lengths, and that's not hyperbole, when he's winning by those distances, Machado's barely moving a muscle on this horse. So I don't know what Next is capable of at his best. I don't know what he's capable of when he's being asked to go even faster and to do even more. I know what he's capable of doing without even being prompted, and that's pretty damn impressive. Now let's dive into some of the form that we've seen from him. Interestingly enough, this was a horse that was previously trained by Wesley Ward way back in the day. Actually ran in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile against Essential Quality. Remember that name? Yeah. So this Next has been knocking around for a long time, was in Wesley Ward's barn. And as you would expect, Wesley had him on the turf and heck, even sprinting sometimes. Turns out he had the best dirt marathoner we've ever seen, or at least have we seen in a very long time. Next goes to Cowens, and they kind of stumble upon something back in 2022 in the fall of that year when the horse runs in an off-turf race at Delaware Park going 1.5 miles. And they run the horse in that race. The horse wins by 18 plus lengths, gets a 100 Beyer speed figure. That horse has not been on the turf since. But this is a horse that was running in $50,000 claimers at one point at Churchill Downs back in May 2022. But since going to the dirt and since stretching out, he has been dominant. His only loss is back coming off the bench in 2023. And Cowens himself admitted he probably screwed that one up. He said he didn't have the horse back and didn't necessarily have the horse all the way ready for that particular race. That loss he felt was on him more than anything else than on the horse. Otherwise, the horse has been untouchable. You see the margin of victory in these last several races, winning the Greenwood Cup by 10, winning the Birdstone by 22, winning the Brooklyn by 9, winning the Murphy Marathon by 11, winning the Greenwood Cup last year by 25, winning the Birdstone last year by 11. I mean, again, nobody has even been close to him. And he's been running against some nice horses. And there's a race in particular I want to look at because I think it's relevant to what we're going to be seeing in the Breeders' Cup Classic. Now, he draws the outside post. He's 8-1 in the morning line. He draws the far outside 14 post. Listen, if any horse is going to overcome having to travel a little bit further, it is Next. And this, I would say, might be an ideal post position for him. Machado can keep him out in the clear, which is what he likes to do. And he has the entire front stretch to work his way over into the first turn. Because remember, you have the chute, and then you have the whole front stretch to slowly work your way over. And I think that's relevant. And the best example of this, honestly, is the Brooklyn. If you look at that race 3 back, I think that's the most informative race to look at for 2 reasons. One, it's the shortest distance. He's going 1 3/8 in that race. That's only a furlong longer than what we're going to be doing on Saturday in the Breeders' Cup Classic. So it's very comparable distance. It also, if I'm not mistaken, I actually looked this up, so I do know I'm not mistaken. The fractions in that Greenwood Cup, 49 and change, 114, 137, were almost identical to the fractions that were run the previous year in the Jockey Club Gold Cup at 1.25 miles. And this also has a very similar configuration. It's not a 3-turn race. It's a 2-turn race in terms of the Brooklyn. Has that starting coming out of the chute. You have the whole home stretch, and he drew a little further outside. Now, it was a shorter field, only a 7-horse field, but he drew the number 6 post, and he was running against arguably the best competition we saw, running against a multiple stakes winner like Krupe, running against a horse like Mask Parade, who's won some big races, running against a horse like Drake's Passage that's had some nice runs. So he ran against some good horses that day, certainly Krupe probably being the best of the group. But I just think it's an incredibly informative race to go back to and watch, because it really is going to, I think, be the closest thing to replicate to what you're going to see at Del Mar on Saturday. So we're going to pick it up at the start. He's in the number 6 post, 7-horse field, big gray horse you see right there. And again, coming out of a chute, and now you got the whole front stretch to work your way over. You see Machado really taking a hold of him, making sure that he's kind of sitting in that second position, not asking him for him at all, really restraining him. If anything, Drake's Passage goes out up front, but he's got the whole front stretch to work his way over. And I think obviously here he's able to work over into the 2-path, but even if he's able to work over into the 3-path, if he's sitting outside of a horse like Fierceness, if he's sitting outside of a horse like Forever Young or Dermasotogake, who are further inside, no problem at all. City of Troy, same sort of thing. So he's got that whole stretch to work his way over. If he's hung 3 or 4 wide, not the end of the world. Actually, maybe even preferable that he likes going a little bit longer in that regard. Now, the finish, here's the thing that's so important, I think, about the finish in this race. And here he is looming up. He takes over from Drake's Passage at this point. And this is what I mean about you don't know what he is at his best. Machado kind of pushes down a little bit on his neck, but otherwise, Machado's barely asking him for anything. The horse just has an incredible cruising speed, and he's just pulling away from horses. I mean, Kruppe's trying to make up a little bit of ground, but it's just not doing anything. You just see what dominant horse he is at this division. And Machado's just completely buttoned up at this point and just has this horse wrapped up at the wire. Ran a 109 Beyer speed figure in this race. If you look at the Beyer speed figures, if you look at other speed figures, he definitely matches up. And again, he's never been asked for his best. So I don't know what his best looks like necessarily. None of us do. There is no doubt that he is maybe an oddity for some people. For some, he's an automatic toss. I understand that. For some, he is a horse that they are going to be using in a really serious way and leveraging in a pretty serious way. 8-1, I'm comfortable with that price on him. I kind of hope he floats up maybe a little bit. I'd love to see him get to double-digit odds. I think he's really interesting at 10-1, 12-1. I think that's where I would feel most comfortable using him as just a straight-up win bet potentially. I think he's got a better chance than maybe some people think he does in this race. There's not necessarily an incredible amount of speed. Insofar as Arthur's Ride's your only horse that needs to go to the front. There's a lot of horses that like to track the pace. We'll have to see what happens on the inside with horses like Forever Young, Highland Falls, City of Troy, Dermasotogake, Mixto. Those horses might have a little bit of early speed as well and are going to try to go. We know Fierceness has good early speed too, but I think a horse like Next, listen, he's got a great cruising speed. I know the 1.25 miles is not a problem. And it's just a matter of whether or not Luan Machado asks him for too much early in the race. If he's right up on the pace and they're going 23 and change, 46 and change, that might be too much for him to sustain that run then that we see. Obviously, we just saw in the Brooklyn, and we've seen in so many of those other dirt marathon races. If, however, they go, I don't know, 23 and 4, 24 and 1, 47 and something, and he's sitting maybe, third, fourth in that area, and he's sitting outside of the pace, I think he's got a real shot because, again, he can do the distance. And if Arthur's Ride is able to kind of control things a little bit up front and Machado's able to keep this horse out in the clear, I just think he's so proven at getting better as he goes longer that last furlong, he's going to keep finding his best stride. We don't know what his best is yet. I think he's just such a fascinating horse in this race. And I'll be honest, I really like him. I'd rather have him in post 14 than in post 1. I'll tell you that. I'd rather have him in 14 than even post 5. I think that the outside post is advantageous to Next. Machado can work his way over during that front stretch. And if he's wide, he's wide. It's not the end of the world. The key is to keep him in the clear. He has shown the ability to rate a little bit. He does get somewhat headstrong. So that is something to keep in mind. He probably won't like to be too far back. And that's what I mean about if he gets sucked up into a faster pace, then that is a problem. But if you're projecting the pace to be modest or at least a normal pace, then I think you have to give Next a really big shot in this particular race. Now, from a betting standpoint, like I said, he's a little bit of an X factor. Do you use him in your horizontals? It depends how deep you're going, I think, and depends who else you're using to some extent. If you like a horse like Fierceness, if you like a horse like City of Troy, including a horse like Next, I don't know how wide you want to spread in that particular race while using a couple of potential favorites. But if you're looking to beat Fierceness and City of Troy, then I think including a horse like Next, including a horse like Highland Falls, including a horse like Forever Young, who's probably going to be your third choice, I think that makes a little bit of sense from a ticket structure standpoint. And I just think he's worth consideration in this race. He's been too good for too long and too consistent not to give this horse a shot in this spot. Like I said, I understand some people think he's an automatic toss. I get it. But I think that he's got a shot the way that this race shapes up. And if there's ever a year that a horse like this could do it, it feels like this year. In much the same way, if there's ever a year where a horse like City of Troy coming over and trying dirt for the first time could win, could be this year. I feel like, there's just such a lack of top end talent among the older male horse population in the United States that I feel like there's a shot for these international 3-year-olds like City of Troy and Forever Young, a 3-year-old like Fierceness, a dirt marathoner like Next. I think it's a wide open race, and I wouldn't be surprised if Next racks up another victory. Listen, it's going to be a lot of fun to watch. It's going to be a lot of fun to talk about too after the race. Glad you tuned into this episode. Love talking about Next. I've had the pleasure of seeing him multiple times. He's a cool horse. One thing to know, he bites his tongue. He loves to bite his tongue. He loves to chew on his tongue. So if you see a little bit of blood coming from his mouth before a race, don't worry. It's what he does. So he's a little bit of a quirky horse in that regard, but all thoroughbreds are a little bit quirky. So something to keep in mind. Listen, thanks so much for tuning in. Really appreciate it. Make sure to press that like and subscribe button today on NYRA Bets YouTube. My name is Matthew DeSantis, wishing you a great and prosperous day at the races and reminding you, friends, it's now post time.